All right, so let's get right to this. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit short and a little bit quicker on the review. So on the book 4, which is Goblet of Fire, Harry is now in, well, we could say, after the events where he discovered that his godfather is an ex-convict, basically. Not that he was actually guilty of the crime itself, but he was actually he was actually incriminated. And so right now that he has managed to escape and has managed to contact Harry and also kind of finally find Peter Pettigrew, the person he was allegedly charged of murdering, well, now he's on the run. Because as we saw before, third book, Peter Pettigrew wasn't dead. He is an animagus, meaning that he can turn at will into a specific animal. And in his case, he can turn into a rat. And very much like the other members of Harry's dad's group, where Harry's dad would turn into a stag. Remus Lupin, well, he's not technically an animagus, he's a werewolf. Sirius could turn into a black dog, and well, who was the other member? Yeah, I think that was those were the four friends. Anyways, so Sirius is on the run, and something that I might have forgotten to mention is that because Snape was fed up with how things have ended, I mean, it was his opportunity to get revenge on Sirius after all those years of basically having this feud with Harry's dad and then Sirius and that group. Well, more with Sirius and James. So he was mad and he let slip, quotation marks. So basically everybody knew in the school, and by proxy also the parents, that Remus Lupin, as good as a teacher he is and is very much liked that he was, still, I mean, they weren't happy that there was a werewolf next to the children that could potentially eat them and all that, and well, things that would never happen if you knew Lupin. So he ended up quitting on his own, and he says bye to Harry. Well, actually, Harry meets up with him before he leaves, and Remus gives him back the map, the Marauders map, as he says that he's no longer his professor, and therefore he no longer feels guilty on giving back the map, which Harry could potentially use for, let's say, going undercover, you should say, or things that you wouldn't say that follow the school rules. So now we are in the 4th book. Now, in the summer, Harry had been invited to this grand tournament of Quidditch. It's the World Cup, and if you are a fan of any sport, you know that a World Cup is a big deal. It's kind of like the ultimate, the best of the best from each country, and it's an opportunity to say, my country is the best. And so he was very excited. I do believe that it wasn't precisely England, but it was like Ireland versus Russians or something. Anyways, I don't remember the names of the teams, but there was going to be this tournament, and Harry was invited as Mr. Weasley. He actually got tickets. He was able to get tickets for the whole family. I think the only person who didn't go was Molly, and except for her, I think everybody else didn't make it. I mean, it was Fred and George, it was Ginny, it was Ron, even Hermione went, Harry obviously, and I want to say that one of the older brothers are no longer at school. Bill and no, actually, you know what? Forget it. They didn't go. It was just Fred, George, Ron, Harry, Ginny, and then Mr. Weasley. Oh, and Hermione, if I didn't mention her. And so, now we get into this kind of weird territory where apparently there is such a thing as portkeys. Now, portkeys are these objects that are charmed so that if you come in contact, you are operating into a specific location, even if you don't know where this location is, but it takes you from your destination. It's kind of like a shortcut in real life or in the book. Okay, you get what I mean, you know. So Harry does get there. I mean, he meets up with Ron at his home. Um, they go over to the Quidditch World Cup, and something really interesting happens. So, for the record, the World Cup is in this location that's kind of far away from where Muggles or people who can't do magic from where they are. So you have this kind of like empty field, empty wide open space, this huge encampment, and funny enough, the guard is not a wizard, but the guard is an actual Muggle that they just have charmed so that he doesn't kind of notice or recall any magical happenings going on. But they have the World Cup, everything is happening so fast, and then, well, you do have like the team mascots, like the leprechauns that come out, and yes, they're actual leprechauns, that they're kind of throwing gold in the air, but it's not real gold, it's kind of like fake, it disappears after some time, which is kind of funny because Ron gets a lot of gold, gives it to Harry and says, "Here, haha, there you go, I paid you back everything that I owed you." And then when it disappears, he goes, "Oh, I have to pay you back now." Anyways, and this one, they don't mention it in, well, they do mention it in the book, but in the movies they don't show it. But there's also, apart from the leprechauns, the team mascot for the other team. There are a group of, they look like women, very attractive women, called Villas. Now, Villas are not actually women, they're not actually human. What they are is they are these creatures that they look like women, but they turn into these kind of winged beasts that will eat you. So they charm you by their looks, and then they turn to these beasts that will actually kill you. And that's kind of like the thing. When they're in their woman form, they actually do charm people, or men, I should say. So it gets kind of funny, because all the men are dancing, and then I think even Harry's like on the balcony where they're sitting for the World Cup. He's even like on the ledge, and he's dancing and about to fall. And then like Ron Sawyer just boys. Anyways, I say anyways a lot, don't I? So the World Cup goes on how it happens. Even Victor Crumb, who is like one of the leading Quidditch stars, shows up, and then he's also a seeker, so his job is to look for this kind of small golden ball with wings that's incredibly fast. And well, we see that even though they were losing, Victor Crumb, instead of prolonging the match, he does catch the snitch, the golden ball, because he knows that it was going to be a massacre, so he finished it before they could score even more points that they had on them. Now, at the end, and the most important part about this World Cup is that in the end, everybody is celebrating, but then there's something that happens. There's a green mark that comes in the sky, and but all the wizards are kind of running around all over the place. And something that Harry sees is that there is muggles, or people that are kind of hanging. They're it's like they were hanging on invisible strings, but up in the sky. Well, not high in the sky, but they were floating. And it was almost as if it was meant as a form of punishment slash embarrassment, humiliation. I mean, it was just horrible. It turns out that you could see these wizards in black robes. You can see their faces because they had masks, but people seemed very afraid of them. Not only that, but when Harry and the rest of his friends are over in the forest as they were running away from the camp, they come to see this kind of mark in the sky, which is green with the shape of a skull, and then a serpent coming out of the mouth. And that's when they learn that that is called the death mark. Now, Harry at this point had lost his wand, and so when they were confronted with ministry officials, orders, or you could say the law enforcement, he does get into a slight bit of trouble. But then they recall, well, he is in Hogwarts. How can a student know how to do the death mark? That's barely something that only Death Eaters or these dark wizards knew how to do. And so he got off clean, but still, it just sets the precedence that when Voldemort was active and he was doing his thing, he had his followers, and that's kind of important for later on in the series. But his followers weren't like his friends or anything, but basically his followers, they call themselves Death Eaters, because the one thing that they did was they killed other people, not be killed themselves. And so they were very much feared. They weren't afraid of using the most dangerous spells or the most illegal ones. I mean, it's, you know, just horrible. They're just horrible people. And so we go back to the camp. They go back home. They're ready to start a new school semester, and thankfully there's no Dementors this time around. But there are a few changes. One of the changes that is worth mentioning is that they have a new defense against the dark arts. Not surprising. I mean, it is very much taboo at this point. We've already gone through Quirrell. We've already gone through Lockhart, Lupin. Now we are with an next Auror. His name is, they call him Mad-Eye Moody. And so with Mad-Eye Moody, he is very extravagant, to say the least. So Mad-Eye Moody, being an next Auror, he has spent many years fighting against the dark arts. And one of his quirks is that he has a peg for one of the legs, and also he has a glass eye, which apparently can see through anything. But also he is very much on the defensive. One of the things that he says is constant vigilance. I can't remember if that's only in the book, but at least in the movie they do say it quite a bit. And so another thing that is very peculiar and worth mentioning is that he does not drink from any other cup that is not his. He carries around his own cup. And that comes into play because, you see, one thing that he will say is that, I have experience with being poisoned, so you can't poison me if I am the one that pours what I'm drinking, or I know what I am drinking. So pretty much you get the idea on who he is. And there's another event, another change. You see, for over 100 years, an event that hadn't been taking place, or that hadn't occurred in quite some time, was the Triwizard Tournament. Now, the Triwizard Tournament is a competition between 3 different schools. It's a competition between Hogwarts from England. It's a competition with Beauxbatons from France, and from Durmstrang, which is, they don't really say from where, but in the movie and also in the book, when one of the students actually describes more or less their location, it would seem like they're located somewhere in Russia, in one of the least populated regions where it's just pure ice and snow. Now, when you go back to the competition is like very prestigious. I mean, if you win in the competition, you get forget the amount, but you do get a very considerable amount of galleons, or like these gold pieces that are worth quite a bit. And you also gain recognition, because not anybody is the Triwizard champion. And so one of the new things that was going to happen is that in the school, you're going to have these 2 schools, not everybody from the schools, but 2 schools are going to bring their representatives and see who is going to enter the competition. And everybody's very excited. Even Harry and Ron start fantasizing about being in the competition. Although, admittedly, none of them actually wanted to be in the competition. because one of the reasons why it hadn't happened in such a long time is that people actually died, and by people I do mean the students. And so it's kind of like you do get glory, you get fame. It is like very like a much like a, not to say a boy's fantasy, but it is like a fantasy of being like the hero, like the sports captain. But you do have that downside in which you know what's going to be there. There's going to be a lot of dangers. It's going to be highly difficult, and there's a probable chance that you're going to die. So, yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't be in that competition, but hey, that's just me. Anyways, going a little bit more forward, you do have that in the first class with Professor Moody. Alistair Moody, that's his name. So, in the first lecture, he actually, it's quite unique because when you saw with Professor Quirrell, it was more like a traditional classroom type of thing, where yes, you look at the books, your lecture, that's it. With Lockhart, it was more of a quiz on how much you know about him, because it's all about him, not about what he has done, because he really didn't do anything. With Lupin, it was very much practical. Now, Moody, on the other hand, he goes into detail in the sense of a lecture, but not as in a traditional lecture. But what I mean is this. As part of the curriculum, there's obviously going to be things that you don't want to touch, because either the students are too young, or it's going to be too much for them, or it's not appropriate. He actually does the opposite. He goes towards the inappropriate subjects. And in the first lecture, he goes over unforgivable curses. Now, this is the one opportunity that we have to actually see a little bit more on Harry, what he went through when he was a child. So, the 3 unforgivable curses, they're named unforgivable curses because anyone who performs any single one of them is a direct cause for you to go straight to Azkaban. No questions asked, nothing. You perform one of them, you're imprisoned. And he goes through the first one, which is Crucio. Crucio is a spell that basically it produces a lot of pain, and your victim is actually just like screaming, and they can't move on their own, right? Because they're in so much pain. Neville has a very interesting reaction. I'll touch on that a little bit later on. The second unforgivable curse is called the Imperious Curse. Now, the Imperious Curse takes a different approach, because while with the Crucial, it was you're immobilized because of pain. With the Imperious, it's kind of like you are mind controlled. You become a puppet. And so while you're on the Imperious Curse, you have no say whatsoever on what you do. Now, the third one is one of the most devastating. It's probably the most devastating of all of them. It is the Avada Kedavra. The Avada Kedavra is a curse known as the Killing Curse. And on demonstration, and Professor Moody did on, I think it was like on a spider or something, it shows as a glow of green light, or a flash of green light, and the victim dies, right? And we learned that this is exactly what happened to Harry. So when Voldemort had gone to Harry's home and had killed his mom, his dad, that was a spell that he had used, the Avada Kedavra. And he had attempted to use that same curse on him. But for some reason, that curse kind of bounced back and hit him. And so the only known survivor of the Avada Kedavra is Harry. Harry is the only survivor. They don't know how, and Harry only knows that he was protected by his mother's love, but still, there is no sure guarantee of getting around that curse or protecting yourself. You're basically dead if it hits you. Now, yeah, I'm losing my voice. Now, the reason why Neville had such a reaction towards the Crucio curse, or Cruciatus curse, sorry. Crucio is the actual spell. But the reason why he was so odd with that curse is that it turns out that Neville, he lives with his grandmother, and we've known that since the first book. But his parents, the reason why his parents are not around is because they weren't killed. They were just tortured by a member of the Death Eaters who is currently in Azkaban. And they were tortured so much with the Cruciatus Curse that they kind of lost their mind. I mean, they no longer remember him, and they're no longer in that capacity to actually take care of Neville. That's why he came to live with his grandma. It's very much a sad story because even when Harry has lost both his parents, Neville, his parents are still there physically, but he, in a sense, he has also lost his parents. So imagine you have that person right there in front of you, but they don't respond to you. They don't even, hug you, look at you, tell you that they love you. I mean, as far as they're there, but they're no longer there. They're no longer your loved one. But for you, they're still your loved one. You just, it's, I don't know. In my opinion, that's kind of like a worse case, because yes, Harry has lost them. They died. But there is that kind of resolution, that ending, that closure. In Neville's case, they're still alive, and there is no closure. Well, getting to a little bit happier subjects, which is not that happy, but it's more upbeat. So we do have that by around Halloween. The Beauxbatons and the Doomstrong, they arrive, and the Beauxbatons, they arrive on this kind of carriage, or this, I don't know what you would call it, but carried by these huge winged horses. I think they're called Braxton horses, but they're huge and they fly, and they arrive. Out of the lake, there is a ship that kind of pops up, and that's from Doomstrong. So we finally get to meet the two other schools that are going to participate in the competition. And wow. So starting with the Doomstrong, they seem pretty powerful, right? I mean, they are pretty intimidating, but not so much intimidating as one of the students there, which is Victor Crumb. Yes, Victor Crumb, Quidditch player, the same one. Apparently, he hasn't finished school and he's already playing in the major leagues. And also, interesting fact, he does, and they don't go over this in the movie, but apparently he kind of wobbles when he's walking. His grace is when he is actually in the air flying. That's where he's most agile. On the ground, not so much. Well, as you would probably imagine if you knew Ron was being a fan. I mean, he was wanting to actually ask for signatures and all that. I mean, he was just being a complete fan. Then something really funny happens when you come to Beauxbaton. The Beauxbaton, they're not like strictly female, or for some reason in my headcanon they are like an all-girl school, but there are boys and girls. And the funny thing is that when the girls come in, they stun everyone. Not in the sense that they do a spell, but apparently they're so beautiful that like all the guys start kind of fawning over them. And even Ron, like, he's lost his senses with one of the older students. Her name is Gabrielle. No, Gabrielle, that's the sister. Fleur. Fleur is, well, we don't know this until later on, but she's half human, half Vila. And so she has that kind of charm to her. And Ron is so infatuated with her. I mean, he's crushing. He has a huge crush on her. So much so that it gets kind of annoying at some point. But yeah, I mean, you get to see it in a movie. In the book, I think they do describe it a little bit better. So I would recommend you read the book if you can. Anyway, or read it again if you have forgotten. Anyways, we'll continue moving on, and it's time for the first stage, and that is choosing the competitors. When they choose the competitors, they bring out this chalice or goblet. No, it's I don't know what's the difference. Anyway, they bring out the chalice, and from the chalice comes a kind of like bluish flame. And what it is that they have an amount of time where they can submit their names. The students can. However, there are restrictions. Because of the nature in which it can be dangerous and people have died, they have age restricted for, I think it was like 16 or 17. I can't recall. But what they did was they put that age restriction. So it was an actual charm that they put. And even if you gave that that slip with your name to an older student, they wouldn't be able to submit it because there's like other charms and protections around it. Fred and George, who barely missed the cut, they tried and they ended up with beards. So you can see how well that goes. But we go to that night where they're now going to name the competitors, the challengers. And so, not surprising, Fleur gets chosen to represent the Bubble Tone. You have Victor Crumb representing the Germstrongs. And then you have... You thought I was going to say Harry Potter, right? No. It's Cedric Diggory, who comes to represent Hogwarts. And Cedric Diggory, I believe he's on his... I want to say his 6th or 7th year in Hogwarts. Anyways, so here he knows his stuff. I mean, he's actually pretty talented as well. But what do we know? One more name. Harry Potter. I didn't need to whisper that out, but it is it's kind of one of those contentious changes that they did in the movie, because Harry's name is drawn, and that was kind of like the final name that nobody else kind of expected, not even Harry. Obviously, Harry never put his name in that goblet or chalice. I'm just going to say goblet because that's the name of the book, but he goes in with the other challengers to the separate room, and they're kind of stunned because they don't know what he's there for. They initially think that he's there to give them a message, but it turns out that it's not, right? He is one of the competitors. When they come in, one of the differences that happens is that in the book, Dumbledore, you can see that he's angry. He's kind of not okay with the situation. However, he keeps his calm. He is cool. But still, there's like this intimidating air around him. However, in the movie, he is screaming and yelling, and he's just angry. Like, he's very upset. And it's kind of like two different approaches. I'm not really sure which one is better. Their own interpretation or the book's original interpretation. Anyway, so what they conclude is that, and it's not just Dumbledore there. I mean, you also have the Ministry, who has their own representative in, the games and something else department. So their kind of call was that because when you submit a name to the goblet, it is a binding contract. They can't just put Harry out of the competition. He does have to compete. But there's also the matter in which Harry obviously didn't put his name. He wasn't going to be able to with all the charms and protections. So to fool the goblet, it had to be a very powerful wizard. Wizard. And therefore, somebody wants Harry to be placed in danger. And so that's what happens. What they decide to do is that they will keep Harry in the competition and just observe from the sidelines until the actual guilty party who submitted Harry's name was in the open, or they can discover who it is. So we go to the first challenge, and I should probably stop saying but okay, to explain, there are 3 challenges, and after the third challenge, they declare who's the victor, and they do based on points, and based on your kind of your place within the competition, you get awarded certain points, or you get certain amount of points, and okay. The deal is, with the first 2 challenges, you are given points, and depending on your location on the scoreboard or on the leaderboard, that's an additional advantage that you have over in the third challenge. And the third challenge is what dictates who the winner is. So on the first challenge, supposedly nobody knew, but with Ron being angry at Harry for not telling him or even helping him submit his name, because he's under the impression that Harry did behind his back. He doesn't help Harry at all prepare, but Hagrid actually knows what the first obstacle is going to be, the first challenge. And what happens is that he invites Harry over, obviously under the guise of his invisibility cloak, and that's how he discovers that the first challenge are dragons. They weren't the only ones. I mean, what was her name? Madame Maxime. She's the headmistress of Beauxbaton. So she was also there, so she also knows that there's dragons. They also operate under the impression that Victor Crumb knows about the dragons as well. So the only one who personally doesn't know was Cedric Diggory, but Harry does look out for him, and even though the people or the students in Hogwarts are kind of against him, and even Slytherins have taken the chance to I think it was Malfoy who made badges saying Potter stinks or something like that. Anyways, he is unpopular at this point, Harry. But he does look for Cedric Diggory, and he tells him, hey, first competition or first challenge, dragons. Prepare. And so the way that Harry prepares is that he gets this useful tip from Professor Moody, where he plays to his strengths. Harry is talented, but his one biggest strength is his flying. He can fly a broom very well. I mean, he is very much gifted. He's not just a good Quidditch player. He's a good Quidditch player because he's a good flyer. And so when the day comes, I think it was first Cedric or was Fleur. Either way, I mean, Fleur tries to kind of charm the dragon, which doesn't work. Cedric tries to he transfigures a rock into a dog to distract the dragon, but that kind of didn't work that well. I mean, it does work. They do get the eggs. There was this one egg they had to get, one golden egg, but they got damaged. I mean, they got hurt. Even Victor, he tried flying, but also that didn't work that well. So when it was Harry's turn, Harry actually did a spell, a summoning spell called Accio, which basically brings the object to you, which I wouldn't mind being able to do. I mean, how many times you don't want to get up for something and you wish you could just go, hey, come over. So he summons his broomstick, his firebolt, and he flies, and I think he was even the fastest in getting the egg. So that was a victory. And after that, I mean, for some reason, Ron hadn't been believing that Harry hadn't put his name in the goblet during all this time. But it wasn't until he went through and faced the dragon that's when he starts to believe Harry and saying, yeah, I know you wouldn't be crazy enough to go through with this and actually face the dragon when they didn't know about the dragon beforehand. I don't know how that logic works, but the fact is they're friends. They're friends again. Now, for the second stage of the competition, they have to actually figure out what was in the egg because, as I said, they grab the golden egg, and there's a clue about the second stage of the competition. And oh boy, I didn't mention this because it wasn't important for the plot that much. So Moaning Myrtle. Moaning Myrtle. That's a hard name to say. Moaning Myrtle. Moaning Myrtle, the ghost that kind of haunts the bathrooms. She is very creepy, very very creepy. So, in to return the favor, Cedric does let Harry know, hey, if you wanna, you should probably take a shower with the egg. What's more, go to the prefect's bathroom, and he tells him how to get there, and says, use that bathroom in particular, and just take a bath. Just take a bath and enjoy the egg. Just to kind of, he doesn't really tell him how to open it or how to get the secrets. But, all right, so that's kind of like the thing about doing this in a podcasting type of way. You don't get to see how this falls down the microphone. Yeah, in case you're interested, which I don't think, but the table's a little bit wobbly, so the microphone fell down. All right, so Harry does go to the bathroom, and he does try to figure out how to open it. Myrtle, for some reason, she thinks it's appropriate to kind of pop out in the boys' bathroom and do her presence inside the bath. Mind you, Harry is naked at this point because he's in a bath, and which looks more like a pool, but he's in this bath, and he has to actually cover himself with the bubbles, kind of using the bubbles to kind of block any sight that she might have. And so Myrtle, she comes over, and then she's all, you have to dunk it in the water or something like that. So what Harry had to do was put the egg inside the water, because he could open it. You can always open the egg even out of the water, but when you do so, there's a huge screech that it's unbearable to listen to, and you don't understand anything. When you open it in the water, that's when it becomes more understandable. Where it's clearer what it's saying, and it's not a screech. It's actually more like a chant, like a singing. And so when Harry listens to it, he kind of starts thinking, well, what's under the water? The gist of what is said is something or someone is going to be taken away from him, what he values the most, and it's going to be brought down into the water, where he is going to have to retrieve it. And so Harry gets to thinking, and he comes to, very quickly I might add, he arrives to a conclusion that somebody's going to be taken away from him, or something, and he might have to go in a water in the lake. So he kind of asked Myrtle, is there any mermaids or anything underneath the lake? And even Myrtle's impressed, and she says, the bubbles were almost out, and when Cedric kind of came to the same conclusion. So you arrived faster to that conclusion. What's creepier, at least in the film, because when you talk about in the book, I mean, I think she passed away when she was like 15 or 14, something like that. So yeah, she's still a creepy girl. In the movie, she's a creepy woman. Not that she was written as a woman, but if you look at the casting, the same actress who played Moaning Myrtle for the second film, in the fourth one, she is actually around like 30 years of age. She just has like that type of face where she can pass by as a little bit younger. Although this was a lot younger, but so yeah, a 30-something-year-old woman in the bath with a 14-year-old boy who was naked. Yeah, not creepy at all, I would say. No, not at all. Alright, so Harry tries to kind of figure out what's the secret. How can he survive underwater? because that's the thing. You can't rise to the surface, breathe, and then go to the deep side of the pool. So as the day comes, I believe it was Neville who kind of no, it wasn't Neville. That's another difference. In the movies, it was Neville who kind of helps Harry arrive to a solution. In the book, it was actually Dobby. What it is that there is kind of like these, it's kind of like this algae that's wrapped in the ball, and it's called a gillyweed. And if you eat the gillyweed, you can actually breathe underwater for a limited amount of time, and that's what Harry does. He didn't see Ron, he didn't see Hermione, he wasn't sure where they went, so he went to the lake, goes underwater. He finds it's Ron who is waiting for him, unconscious, but it's Ron. And there's also Hermione. And funny enough, why is Hermione there? Well, turns out the people that they took to the lake was Fleur's sister, for Fleur, obviously. For Ron, well, for Harry, they took Ron. For Hermione, Victor Crumb, because apparently Victor Crumb has a crush on Hermione. Which, okay, side note, let's face it. Who didn't have a crush when watching the Harry Potter movies? Who didn't have a crush on Emma Watson? Come on. So I can understand Victor Crumb a little bit on that front. So Hermione is there more for Victor Crumb. However, funny enough, there's other dangers inside the water. It's not just getting to the water. There's dangers. So Harry, being the first person there, his main concern was that if any one of them wasn't rescued, that they're going to be drowned in the water. So he stays behind. Richard Crumb arrives. He takes away Hermione. Cedric. Who was Cedric? Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention that. For Cedric, they got Cho Shang. So that's who he had to save. And I think at that point, Cedric and Cho were dating. And Fleur never got there. There was no signs of Fleur. And time was already running out because they were only given like in an hour or two. So Harry does the most sensible thing, which pull out a wand and threaten the mermaids, who are actually the mer people that didn't want to let him take the girl. But he does. I mean, he takes both Ron, he takes Gabrielle. Gabrielle is Fleur's sister. They go over to the top and they're saved, right? For some reason, Harry thought, and Hermione was make a point of this, he thought that they were actually going to die. If people weren't rescued, that they were actually going to drown and die. And that wasn't the case. I mean, what was going to happen, it was only like part of the spectacle, the entertainment of the whole competition. But in reality, if Gabrielle would have stayed in the water, the mer people would have brought her back up. So she wouldn't have drowned. She would actually still be alive. But because Harry had stayed behind, he was actually in last place. Everybody was late. Everybody went overtime. But because Harry stayed, he actually would have been first. He would have been in first place if he had just gone up straight up. Because he lingered, that's why, he was last. But he was given extra points for moral fiber. I think that's what they said in the film. So that went well. For the third competition, oh boy. So they know that there's going to be a maze and that there are going to be dangers. Not just spells, incantations, there's also going to be creatures. So yeah, not good. But Ron and Hermione do help Harry out. Now, during this whole time, Mad-Eye Moody, Professor Moody, would try to give Harry hints on what to do, or he would always offer help, offer assistance. However, there was no signs of who actually put Harry's name in the goblet. So that was still a concern, because if there was any moment where Harry was going to be the most vulnerable and the most likely place to die, that is going to be in the third competition, in the third challenge, I should say. So what is happening? Well, with all the points, I mean, it was Cedric first, Harry second, uh, Victor third, and then Fleur, who never finished the second competition, the second challenge. She's in last place. So where we are is that we don't know who put Harry's name. There is no clue whatsoever. However, something really interesting and something sad happened, because Harry does find a dead body in the forest. Why the forest? Well, he was going to talk to Victor Crumb, but when he looked over, there was a dead body, and turns out it was the head of games and something department from the ministry. So, Mr. Crouch, that's the name of the head of the games department. Barty Crouch, he died. Nobody knows how he died or what happened. And so, obviously, this is a great concern. But this leads to kind of the second part of the puzzle, in which Harry, right now the details are very foggy, but Harry is in Dumbledore's office, and he finds this kind of special dish. Or, well, not dish, but he finds this artifact, right? And this artifact is filled with what looks like water, except that he saw Dumbledore kind of place these strings. It's kind of hard to explain. If you saw the movie, they it's more visible, and it's kind of like more it's easier to understand. But he saw Dumbledore kind of pull this long glowing string from his head and place it inside the water, where it was swirling and there was like images that were flashing. However, when Dumbledore had to step out of the room for a bit, Harry was drawn to this artifact. And when he looked closely at the at what was inside the water, because there was like images still floating on, he saw himself immersed. Literally immersed. I mean, he actually went inside that artifact. And he saw a scene played out. A scene where, in the ministry, where there was this room where apparently somebody was on trial, and it was no other than Karkaroff, which Karkaroff is the headmaster of Durmstrang. Durmstrang, right? I forget if it's Durmstrang or Doomstrang. Doesn't matter. So Karkaroff, he was being on trial, and he was offering a plea deal, saying that if he was let go, and he was in Azkaban, if he was let go, he would give them the names of fellow co-conspirators in who were a part of the tortures of Neville's parents and of other people. At first, they were like, at first, he was naming names that they already knew of, and they were not convinced, so they were going to put him back to Azkaban, send him back. And then he gives out a name. Bartimus Crouch. Bartimus Crouch is part of the jury and the judges, or he's also there to incriminate him. And he's like, well, that is insane, because I'm not a Death Eater. No, Bartimus Crouch Jr., the son. And that was the terrible blow, because now Barty Crouch's son gets taken over to Azkaban And yeah, he was guilty of being a Death Eater and of other things. Dumbledore comes in and he pulls him out. He's not angry, but he does explain. This is called a pensieve. A pensieve is where you could extrapolate your thoughts and you have a more visible or tangible way of examining them, pulling yourself away. So it's easier to kind of reflect over your thoughts when things are getting very blurry or when things are getting a little bit hazy. But he wasn't mad, and he explains that during that trial, Barty Crouch Jr. was found guilty. He went to Azkaban, and shortly after he died. Not just that, but the mother also died a short while after the death of his son. Well, now we have that case in which it seemingly it leads to nowhere. Just remember it. Keep that in mind. Now, I said I was going to keep this short, but let's just finish with this. I'm about to finish this review anyway. So, now we enter to the final stage of the competition. And with this stage, the leaderboard is according to a number of points. And the one advantage that they get is that it gives you the time advantage. So obviously, if you are first place, you're the first person to run into the maze. Second place, so forth. And so they enter the maze. Professor Moody does make he insinuates to Harry in a very sly way where to go, which is the right way to go. So he does that. They disappear into the maze. All right. Harry does reach into, and they're not in the movie per se. Well, they're actually not in the movie. In the movie, you only see like these vines that come out and try to close in and all that. But Harry does, he confronts Scroots, who are, they're kind of like a mix between an elephant and a scorpion, and they can throw lava and all that. But also, he confronts this Sphinx who has a riddle, which if you don't answer correctly, you get eaten, basically. But also, there's this kind of golden mist where everything gets turned upside down. So that was also quite amusing in the book. But we do get to the stage where Harry finds Fleur. Fleur is on the ground. And apparently she was attacked by Victor Crumb. Kind of. So Harry does do the signal. They come get Fleur. He also finds Victor Crumb, who is apparently under the Imperious Curse. And so when Cedric Diggory arrives, he tries to fight him. But Harry does manage to pull him off and convince him that, hey, he's not acting on his own accord. He's been under the Imperious Curse, so we should get out of here. Victor Crumb does get stuck. They do manage to take him down. And they do signal for him to be picked up. Now, they're on the final stretch. There's the cup. Whoever gets to the cup first will disapparate and kind of reapparate. And, there's the victor. They agree that since they're both representing Hogwarts anyways, they're going to run for the prize. So they both touch the cup at the same time. Now, this takes them to an unexpected place. Because apparently they didn't know it, but it's a portkey. And where they are is kind of like a graveyard. They don't know what's happening. And then, cut. Okay, I'm joking about the cut part, but basically it is the end of Cedric Diggory. He dies. He was hit by the Avada Kedavra curse. Harry is instantly restrained. And it's Peter Pettigrew. Peter Pettigrew had been hiding, but he wasn't just hiding. he was actually helping Voldemort, who was in a very weak state. And the way that he was helping him was, bring him sustenance and carrying him around and helping Voldemort get his plan into action. They, when I mean they, I mean it's Peter Pettigrew and Voldemort, but Peter Pettigrew, he has a solution. He has something that's boiling, which Harry doesn't know what it is. But he starts with this incantation, which is something about the father of the bone of the father, or I mean, he grabs like several things that's in the graveyard, and the last thing is a bit of Harry's blood. He cuts him superficially with a knife, drops the blood inside, and then drops Voldemort inside. And now Voldemort is back in his true form as a human. Except that he doesn't look that human. He is very pale, he is very snake-like, but at least now he has his own body. He now has his former strength. So when that happens, he calls over the Death Eaters, his supporters. And when they arrive, he does go into a speech about, nobody looked out for me, and everybody was in hiding, and y'all are cowards and all that. And that my one true and most loyal servant is right now at the school. So you can see where this is going. And he makes it a point that he wants to humiliate Harry before he dies. Humiliate Harry before he kills Harry. So he starts saying, well, let's fight. Grab your wand, make your parents proud, etc. And in the final curse, the Avada Kedavra curse, surprisingly he doesn't manage to kill Harry. Instead, both wands make this connection, because obviously, as Ollivander had mentioned in the first book, they share a phoenix feather that comes from the same phoenix, which is very unusual, but they have this connection. And because of the connection of the cores, there's this kind of combat between both ones, because neither one is allowing the other to kill their master. And so, and this is kind of like a subject, or like a point that gets touched upon later on in the series as well. But Harry's one does react, and that's why there's this connection of the cores. And because of it, even though Harry doesn't know the spell, but there's something that's called a priori incantatem, which is basically it brings out the last curses, or the last bits of magic that the wand had cast. In this case, Voldemort's wand. So you could see the impressions of the people that Voldemort had killed, or the last people that he had killed. So there was Harry's mom, Harry's dad, this grumpy old man that he had killed from the beginning of the fourth book. So you have these different people, even Cedric Diggory. So you had these different people pop up, and they form kind of this protective barrier, and they say, well, Harry, break loose, grab the cup, go away. We'll hold him off as long as we can. And that's what happens. Harry manages to separate himself, runs over to the cup, separates, and in that very quick burst of time, they formed a shield, this protective barrier, and at least it did provide the opportunity for Voldemort not to be able to act against Harry or stop him from separating. Harry is back at the maze, or the exit of the maze. Nobody knows what has happened. Harry did manage to grab Cedric's body before separating, but nobody has noticed that Cedric wasn't moving. They're just celebrating because, Hogwarts won. The thing is, once they start noticing, that's when everybody is struck in horror because somebody died. Harry gets taken away by Professor Moody over to his office, and that's when things start turning a little bit for the worse, because apparently Professor Moody is not Professor Moody. Professor Moody, who hadn't taken his juice, would you call it, his polyjuice, which, if you don't recall, in the second book, it's a potion that allows you to transform yourself into another person. Granted that you have like a piece of hair or something. It was actually ba-ba-da-bam, ba-ba-da-bam. I don't know how is that going to sound because I see here the meter for the voice and it goes into red. So maybe it's a little bit too loud. But surprise, plot twist. Professor Moody is actually Barty Crouch Jr. I should add. Professor Moody is actually the real Professor Moody, who is not a professor because it's technically Barty Crouch who was named professor. Alistair Moody is actually inside the luggage or that bag. Basically where he had stored his clothes and everything. That's where he was. And now he's in the hands of this madman who is also a Death Eater and who at any instant is going to kill Harry. Until Dumbledore arrives, he puts an end to it. And Barty Crouch, well, he is taken away by the Ministry. Now, something that I should note. Cedric wasn't the best of friends with Harry, but a life is a life. It does hit very hard for not just the school, not just for Cho, who had been dating him, not just for the parents. It was also traumatizing for Harry. Because they finally revealed that the plan all along was for Harry to be in first place, be the only one who got to the cup, be the only one present in the cemetery, and be the only one that was killed after Voldemort was brought back into his physical body. It's his fault, or at least that's how he feels, that it's his fault that Cedric dies. Again, a loss is a loss. A life is a life. It is very much a traumatizing event. Harry will not easily forget this. He will, constantly be remembering this, but something to also know is that Cedric, even though he was killed, and even though he wasn't, again, he wasn't the best of friends with Harry, they also weren't enemies. And it very much brings to life how dangerous a small group of people can be. In this magical world, the Death Eaters, even though they're a small group, they do wreak havoc, and they are willing to do anything to be back in power and do what they have to do. This is what I kind of appreciate from the series. Up till now, J.K. Rowling had been writing this cute story of children. From the first book, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old. Starting from this book onward, at least one person dies in each of the following books, right? Obviously, more people die because, Barty Crouch, the father, died and all that, but still. People that we know die. I mean, the characters, the characters that we know, they start dying. And it does bring to the reality that war and conflict are not exactly a black and white issue where you're the bad guy, I'm the good guy, we fight, I win, and everybody lives happily ever after. There are long-term consequences. There are long-term effects. From the first war with Voldemort, you see the fallout, from Neville's parents being no longer able to care for Neville and he has to be taking care of his grandma. From the suffering of also having lost his parents, in Harry's case, where they died. From all this impending discrimination. Because even though I haven't touched upon it, there is this superiority complex, which we'll touch on book 5, a little bit of a spoiler alert, where magic is might. Witches and wizards are better than any other magical creature and better than any muggle. I mean, that's a type of mentality that's very dangerous. Because if you're superior to everyone else, then what can you do? What are you allowing yourself to do? It's a very dangerous concept, but it's something that is being revisited, right? It's something that's constantly revisited, where they saw themselves fit, the Death Eaters, to terrorize this camp for the World Cup. They saw themselves that they were entitled to torture muggles, as they did in the World Cup. They saw themselves as having the right to take away any lives, even the lives of, two young teenagers, Cedric and Harry. They're not even of age. They're not even adults. But it doesn't matter. Even Voldemort thinks that he's entitled to play around with his victims. Mock them, humiliate them. He is better, and therefore he can do whatever he wants. And that's something you see throughout history, where in the name of being superior and that what is right and what has to be done, you're the only one that can make the changes. You are entitled and you have the right of doing whatever you want to do. And that is not the case. We see that, Cedric, after Cedric, let me start over. We see that at the end of the school term, Dumbledore does end off with a speech. They have this farewell speech for Cedric. And while nobody wants to believe what Harry said, because Harry did reveal that Voldemort was indeed back, they all just thought he was crazy. Or they didn't know what to think. Because how can Harry say that a dark wizard who had been wreaking havoc before and was presumed to be dead is back to life? That seems almost fantastical. Not in the terms of being fantastic, but it seems more like a fantasy or more like a nightmare. So Dumbledore, obviously believing Harry that Voldemort was back, his message to them is to stay united. That together we beat evil. I'm just paraphrasing, but basically not to let the adversity kind of separate between them. Rely on your friends. Stick together. When you're separated, that's when you're at your weakest, and that's when you are more likely to fall. Harry does, again, just like with every end of term, he says goodbye to Ron, he says goodbye to Hermione, but there is a promise that they'll come get him, a promise that they're not going to forget Harry, a promise that they'll be back together and they'll be ready to face whatever the new school year will bring. I don't know what else to add about this review other than it is a very powerful message. I know I use the word powerful a lot, but this message of unity, that there are going to be people that are going to try to divide us in order to spread their message of hate, in the hopes of gaining enough power to be able to wreak their havoc and do their will and pretend that they're superior to anyone else. It's a message that even today, without getting too deep into politics, but you have people that don't want others to vote. You have people that they don't want others to have a voice, that they don't see them as actual people just because they have different views, different lifestyles. So for the time that this actually came, that this book was written, you do have this underlying message of that it's a message that can be applied even today. I know I've been stumbling a lot in this final part, but that's how important this message is. You can't just say words randomly. But that is just my opinion. And this is a part why I enjoyed the series. Because from the cutesy, child,